Good day, everyone. This is Ms. Jai, and now we are on the fourth quarter. And in this lesson, all of our lessons for this quarter will be all about the types and forms of creative nonfiction. And for the first lesson, but before we proceed, let's get to know first what is creative nonfiction. According to Merriam-Webster's Encyclopedia of Literature, creative nonfiction is a form of prose based mainly on fact rather than on the imagination, although it may contain fictional elements. And as a literary genre, like poetry and fiction, and drama, creative nonfiction also has many literary types and forms. And generally speaking, creative nonfiction can be divided into three broad categories. We have the biographical narratives, autobiographical narratives, various kinds of personal and formal essays. But for now, let's get to know biographical narratives and autobiographical narratives. So in this lesson, we will be answering the following questions. First, what are biographical narratives? What are autobiographical narratives? I guess our lesson for today will involve only those two questions. So the first one is, what are biographical narratives? Biographical narratives can be classified according to their length, scope, and amplitude into the full-length biography, the profile, the character sketch, and the interview story. First, let us have biography. I believe you are familiar with biography. Now, as the etymology of the term implies, bios is equals to means life, and graphian means writing. Therefore, a biography basically is the narrative of a person's life written by someone else. In contrast, it is different from autobiography, which is the chronicles of a person's life written by the author himself or herself. But this one, a person is writing someone else's life. Now, biography today then may be defined as the accurate presentation of life, history from birth of an individual, along with an effort to interpret the life so as to offer a unified impression of the subject. Now, there are three types of biography. The first one is the full-length or a full-length biography. Typically covers the entirety of the fictitious person's existence, covering all the significant events surrounding his or her life from womb to tomb, and usually includes a family tree and a chronology of milestones in its appendices to further guide potential readers of the books. Technically, the full-length biographies of literary and historical figures are easier to write than those of people who have left behind very little written or pictorial documents about them. This can be a challenge correspondingly to the historical or literary biographer. This is a tremendous challenge of reading and sifting through vast amounts of the textual and visual materials to come up with a coherent life story. Now, an ideal full-length biographer must have the necessary patience and stamina, as well as the clear vision and powerful imagination to reconstruct or put together a more or less truthful narrative of the subject's life. Now, another one is what we call popular biography, as the term implies, refers to the life story of a famous and or successful person, a show business personality, a professional athlete, a business tycoon, a political leader, a fashion celebrity, a reigning monarch, or even a serial killer, which is meant for popular or mass consumption. Furthermore, A popular biographer, more often than not, rides on the popularity or notoriety of his or her subject. Now, a popular biographer who is quite opportunistic even sensationalizes the life story that he or she is telling by focusing on the dirty linen, the scandalous and outrageous aspects of the person's existence. So that is for the popular biography. And then the last one, we have the literary and historical biography. Now, these are not necessarily intended for popular or mass consumption. Now, a creative nonfiction practitioner defined literary biography as a narrative of the life of a literary writer written by another literary writer. On the other hand, historical biography it is a narrative, maybe defined as a narrative of the existence of a historical figure who is interested not only in the personal circumstances and historic events that have shaped his or her subject, but also on how his or her subject has shaped history in return. And both literary and historical biographer are more concerned in telling the truth than the popular biographer. Then we have the profile. The next category is profile. Mostly we profile almost everything, right? When we say a profile, it is shorter than a full-length biography. And a profile is kind of like a biographical narrative that normally concentrates on a single aspect of the featured person's life. Although some background information of his or her origins is included, the profile for the most part focuses on the circumstances and events that have made the featured person important or famous. And then we have character sketch. The character sketch is a form of biographical narrative that is shorter than a profile, like a visual sketch or pen and ink drawing. The character sketch can be described as a cameo or a miniature life of a story. Now, as a literary subgenre, the character sketch has a long history whose origins can be traced back to ancient China, where Sima Qian, in his Shiji, or historical records, featured highly animated character sketches of rulers of his time. Other noteworthy character sketches from ancient times are Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Grecians and Romans and Suetonius' Lives of the Caesars. Okay, so those are some examples of character sketches. And then the last one is we have interview story. The interview story is kind of biographical narrative and have the length of a typical newspaper or magazine article. Like the profile and the character sketch, it zeroes in one particular facet of the featured person's life. Now, but unlike the other two short biographical narratives that require some research and at least a couple of interviews, the interview story can be the product of just one meeting between the writer or the interviewer and his or her subject or the interviewee. But even if it is the result of a single encounter, the featured person in an interview story must still come alive on the written page. Now, this feat can be achieved through vivid description, engaging narration, bits of dialogue, and careful selection of the telling details to create an overall impression of the subject. So what are autobiographical narratives? There is a wide variety of autobiographical narratives ranging from intimate writings made during life that were not intended for publication, that includes letters, diaries, journals, memoir, and reminiscence, to the formal on which is the autobiography. Now let's get to know some of them. The first one is autobiography. According to the Dictionary of Literary Terms, autobiography is an account of one's own life, generally a continuous narrative of major events. It can also be defined as the biography of oneself, narrated by oneself. But the autobiography as a literary genre or form is greater than a mere reminiscence of the important episodes in the life of its author, for it must also be coherent chronicle of a particular kind of existence. Although it has no prescribed pattern or structure, there are roughly 4 different kinds of autobiography. We have thematic, religious, intellectual, and fictionalized. In essence, therefore, an autobiographical narrative is the most self-conscious personal history of its creator, as he or she has chosen to see himself or herself and then render it in writing. Now, memoir, among the more informal forms of autobiographical narrative, the memoir is one that is most often confused with formal autobiography, for both are telling of the author's life. But the two are different because a memoir assumes the life and ignores most of it. Meaning to say that it does not need to be arranged or structured in strictly chronological order like autobiography, and it can be written in fragmentary or dispersed style, like a mosaic or montage of small-scale narratives. But the act of remembering is also very important in the writing of memoir, since the name of this literary genre is a derivative of the French word mémoire, that means memory or reminisce. It is any creative nonfiction narrative writing based in the author's personal memories. And then we have diaries and journals. Diaries and journals as autobiographical narratives have been very popular for thousands of years and have been deployed by different types of peoples for writing and recording personal experiences, thoughts, and feelings. Both diaries and journals are kept private, but many people think that diaries and journals are the same, but especially since writers tend to use the terms interchangeably, but they are different. When we say a diary, it is a form of creative nonfiction that is quotidian or day-to-day record of the specific events that have transpired in lives of its author and is ideally kept on a daily basis. While a journal, it is generally more intimate than a diary, and aside from daily activities, it also contains personal details regarding the impressions and opinions of the journal writers. Okay, so I guess that is the difference between biographical and autobiographical narratives. And to end this lesson, our lesson is all about biographical and autobiographical narratives and what are the types and forms of each one. So there you go. That's all for our lessons. I hope you learned something from it today about autobiographical and biographical narratives as a form of creative nonfiction. So this is your teacher, Teacher Jai. Thank you and see you again.